5th of June, 1944. Somewhere along the railway line between Dieppe and Rouen, a French railway worker named Marcel Dubois crouches behind a signal box, clutching what appears to be an ordinary brass tube no larger than a fountain pen. His hands tremble slightly as he places it against the heel of his worn boot and presses down until he hears the faint crack of breaking glass inside. No one sees him attach it to the explosive charge molded against the railway sleeper. No explosion follows, no smoke, no sound whatsoever. Dubois walks away, rejoins his colleagues, and resumes his shift. 6 hours later, at the precise moment a Wehrmacht supply train laden with ammunition and panzer tank components thunders over that section of track, the delayed detonation tears through the rails. The locomotive and 17 carriages plunge into a ravine. 73 German soldiers die instantly. The switch number 10 delay had just demonstrated why the Germans called it the most diabolical weapon they never saw coming.
The device earned its nickname from British commandos and special operations executive agents who used it across occupied Europe. Time pencil. A small brass tube housing a chemical reaction so precise, so devastatingly simple, that it could be programmed to explode anywhere from 10 minutes to 24 hours after activation. Unlike clockwork mechanisms that ticked or fuses that burned and sparked, the time pencil operated in complete silence. It gave off no light, no heat signature, nothing that could alert a German patrol or a collaborator that somewhere nearby a saboteur had just condemned a target to destruction. But how did such a small device carry enough power to cripple the entire German supply network across France? The answer lay not in the time pencil itself, but in what it triggered. The switch number 10 delay was never meant to be an explosive, it was a detonator, a firing mechanism designed to work with plastic explosives like Nobel 808 or the newly developed Composition C charges that SOE agents carried in their haversacks. The real genius was in the chemical timer that couldn't be diffused once activated because there was nothing mechanical to interrupt. No wires to cut, no clockwork to jam. Once the glass vial broke inside that copper tube, the problem this device solved was brutally straightforward. Between 1940 and 1942, resistance groups across occupied Europe faced an impossible challenge when attacking high-value targets. Clockwork timers were bulky, expensive, and made a faint ticking sound that German sentries learned to recognize. Standard safety fuses burned at a fixed rate, 0.5 meter per minute, producing smoke and a distinctive hiss that gave away saboteurs' positions. Worse still, both methods required the operative to remain dangerously close to the target for extended periods of time. Railway workers couldn't loiter beside ammunition trains without arousing suspicion. Factory employees couldn't spend hours near machinery they were meant to be destroying. German intelligence was aware of the problem facing Allied saboteurs, and by mid-1942 they had implemented countermeasures. Gestapo units conducted random searches of railway workers, looking specifically for timing devices. Sentries were trained to listen for mechanical sounds near sensitive installations. The punishment for being caught with sabotage equipment was immediate execution, often in front of the workforce as a deterrent. British planners at SOE headquarters in Baker Street understood that any new timing mechanism had to be utterly undetectable until the moment of detonation. The solution came from an unlikely source. Major Millis Jeffers, a Royal Engineers officer with a Cambridge education and an obsession with unorthodox weapons, had been running a small experimental workshop since 1939. Initially based within military intelligence research, Jeffress and his small team worked on unconventional solutions to tactical problems that regular Army procurement channels considered too irregular or too dangerous. When Churchill became Prime Minister in May 1940, he took a personal interest in Jeffress's work. Churchill despised bureaucratic delays and was frustrated by the War Office's reluctance to pursue novel weapons. He authorized the creation of a new department answerable directly to the Ministry of Supply, with Jeffress in command. The unit was designated MD1, though it would later earn the nickname Churchill's Toyshop.
MD1 established its headquarters at a Victorian mansion called the Firs in Whitchurch, Buckinghamshire, approximately 60 miles northwest of London. The location was deliberately chosen for its isolation and proximity to railway lines for transporting prototypes to testing grounds. Jeffress recruited engineers, chemists, and inventors who understood that conventional military procurement processes moved too slowly for wartime demands. Among his key collaborators was Stuart McCrae, a former magazine editor with no formal engineering training but an extraordinary talent for translating theoretical concepts into practical devices.
The initial time pencil design emerged from MD1 in late 1940, but it took months of refinement before it reached operational status. The challenge was chemical, not mechanical. Jeffress needed a liquid that would corrode metal at a predictable rate regardless of temperature fluctuations, altitude changes, or the jolting movements of transportation. Early prototypes used sulfuric acid, but field tests revealed catastrophic inconsistencies. Acid concentrations varied with temperature, making delays unreliable. A detonator set for 2 hours might fire after 90 minutes in summer heat or take 3 hours in winter cold.
The breakthrough came when chemists at MD1 switched to cupric chloride, a copper-based solution that corroded steel wire at a far more consistent rate than acid. The liquid was housed inside a thin glass ampule, approximately 15 millimeters long and 3 millimeters in diameter, sealed at both ends. This vial sat inside a copper tube at one end of the device, while the opposite end contained a spring-loaded striker held in place by a single steel wire. The wire ran through a tiny perforation between the copper and brass sections of the tube, precisely 0.5 millimeters in diameter. When an operative crushed the copper tube to break the vial, cupric chloride began eating through the wire. The moment the wire parted, the spring drove the striker down the hollow center of the tube, where it impacted a standard number 27 percussion cap, which in turn detonated the explosive charge. The completed switch number 10 delay measured 130 millimeters in length with a diameter of 11 millimeters, slightly thicker than a standard carpenter's pencil. The early models used brass for the main tube body, but by 1942, production switched to aluminum to conserve strategic materials. Total weight was approximately 1.5 ounces, light enough that an agent could carry a dozen without noticing the burden. Each unit was manufactured to precise tolerances at Station 12, the SOE production facility at Aston House near Stevenage in Hertfordshire. Production began in earnest during 1941, ramping up dramatically as SOE operations expanded across Europe. Station 12 employed over 300 workers by 1943,
many of them women recruited from local villages who had no idea they were manufacturing weapons. Each time pencil required 15 separate manufacturing steps, from machining the brass tube to filling the glass ampules with precisely measured quantities of cupric chloride. Quality control was rigorous. Every fifth device from each production batch went under destructive testing to verify delay accuracy. Failures meant the entire batch was rejected and sent back for analysis. The genius of the time pencil extended beyond its chemical timer. MD1 engineers color-coded each device to indicate its nominal delay. A red band painted around the copper section meant 30 minutes. White indicated 2 hours. Green signified 5.5 hours. Yellow marked 12 hours. Blue denoted 24 hours. Black time pencils were loaded with plain water instead of cupric chloride and served as training devices, safe for instructors to demonstrate activation procedures without risk of accidental detonation.
If you're finding this deep dive into British sabotage technology interesting, subscribing helps ensure you don't miss the next examination of clandestine weapons that changed the war.
Operational deployment revealed both the brilliance and the limitations of the design. Time pencils proved devastatingly effective in the hands of properly trained operatives, but they required careful handling. Temperature variations still affected delays despite the switch to cupric chloride. SOE training schools issued correction charts showing how cold weather extended delays whilst heat shortened them. A green time pencil rated for 5.5 hours might take 6 hours in winter conditions or fire after only 5 hours during a summer afternoon. Operatives learned to account for these variations when planning operations, but the adjustments were never exact.
The first major combat deployment came during the Saint Nazaire raid in March 1942. HMS Campbelltown, an obsolete destroyer converted into a floating bomb, was packed with 4¼ tons of Amatol explosives, fitted with multiple time pencils set for various delays. The ship rammed the Normandy dock gates at Saint Nazaire on the French Atlantic coast. Commandos evacuated whilst German troops swarmed over the wrecked vessel, unaware it was a massive bomb. The time pencils functioned perfectly, though the explosion occurred 90 minutes later than planned due to temperature effects on the chemical timers. When Campbelltown detonated, it killed approximately 360 German soldiers and demolished the only dry dock on the Atlantic coast capable of servicing the battleship Tirpitz.
Across occupied France, Belgium, and Netherlands, resistance cells received time pencils by the thousands in supply drops arranged by SOE. The devices transformed railway sabotage from dangerous amateur attempts into professional operations. Before time pencils, resistance fighters had relied on crude, improvised delays, placing candles near explosives or using alarm clocks stripped from their cases. These methods were unreliable and frequently failed. Time pencils offered consistency. A railway worker could activate a device during his lunch break, place it against a rail joint or inside a signal box, and be miles away with a verifiable alibi when the explosion occurred. German security services struggled to counter the threat because they couldn't identify time pencils by inspection. The devices looked innocuous brass tubes, easily mistaken for pen parts or small torch components. Even if Gestapo officers found one during a search, they couldn't tell whether it had been activated until they examined the inspection hole to see if the safety strip had been removed. By then, If the device was live, they faced the choice of attempting to disarm it, knowing that unscrewing the detonator housing might jar the striker, or evacuating the area and losing the intelligence opportunity. Wehrmacht technical intelligence units eventually captured time pencils and conducted detailed analysis. A report dated September 1943 from the Heereswaffenamt weapons testing facility near Kummersdorf described the device as ingeniously simple and virtually impossible to detect once emplaced. German engineers attempted to develop countermeasures, but found none. The chemical reaction couldn't be neutralized without knowing what concentration of cupric chloride was inside, information that varied with each color code. Attempting to extract the striker risked triggering detonation. The only effective German response was to increase guard presence and conduct more frequent patrols, measures that drained manpower from frontline units.
American equivalents existed, but followed different design philosophies. The Office of Strategic Services developed a mechanical delay switch using clockwork mechanisms, more accurate than the British chemical timer, but bulkier and more expensive to produce. German forces captured American timing devices and found them easier to understand and potentially defuse because they operated on familiar mechanical principles. British time pencils offered no such familiarity. The chemical reaction was irreversible once started.
The July 1944 attempt to assassinate Adolf Hitler at his East Prussian headquarters employed a captured British time pencil. Klaus von Stauffenberg activated a 30-minute device fitted to approximately 2 pounds of British plastic explosive and placed the briefcase bomb beneath the conference table. The explosion occurred precisely on schedule, but Hitler survived because a heavy oak table leg deflected much of the blast. Had Stauffenberg activated the second block of explosive he carried, Hitler almost certainly would have died. The time pencil performed exactly as designed, a fact noted with bitter irony in Gestapo interrogation reports after the conspiracy collapsed.
As the war progressed into 1944 and 1945, time pencil production reached industrial scale. Station 12 at Aston House manufactured approximately 12 million units between 1941 and 1945. Distribution extended beyond SOE to include regular Army units, Royal Marine Commandos, Special Air Service squadrons, and American OSS detachments operating in Europe and Asia. The devices proved particularly valuable during Operation Overlord, the invasion of Normandy. In the weeks preceding D-Day, French resistance groups used time pencils to orchestrate coordinated attacks on railway infrastructure across northern France. Between the 1st and 6th of June 1944, resistance fighters carried out over 900 separate railway sabotage operations, most employing time pencil delays. German reinforcements attempting to reach Normandy faced systematic delays as rail lines were cut, locomotives destroyed, and marshalling yards demolished. Time pencils found unexpected applications beyond railway sabotage. SOE agents in Norway used them to destroy German heavy water production facilities at Vemmerk, a critical blow to Nazi atomic research. Resistance cells in Czechoslovakia employed them against ammunition factories. Yugoslav partisans fitted them to explosive charges placed inside locomotives, where the devices would detonate hours after the train departed, maximizing disruption and minimizing civilian casualties. The versatility of the time pencil made it one of the most distributed weapons of the war. Post-war assessment revealed the strategic impact of these small devices. A German logistics study captured in May 1945 calculated that railway disruptions caused by Allied sabotage delayed troop movements equivalent to destroying an entire panzer division. The study specifically noted that delayed action devices proved far more effective than immediate explosions because they struck targets when maximum disruption occurred and frustrated German attempts to establish patrol patterns.
The switch number 10 delay remained in British service long after 1945. During the Malayan Emergency and later conflicts, Special Forces units continued using time pencils for covert operations. Production finally ceased in the late 1950s when electronic timers became reliable and affordable enough to replace chemical delays. Museum collections today hold examples from various production batches. The Imperial War Museum in London displays a complete set of color-coded time pencils alongside the copper crushing pliers issued to SOE agents. The National Army Museum houses time pencils recovered from former SOE training schools. Collectors occasionally acquire examples through militaria auctions, though most survivors are training devices with the black color code indicating inert fillings.
The legacy of the time pencil extends beyond its tactical success. It demonstrated that simple, robust solutions often outperform sophisticated alternatives in clandestine warfare. The device required no batteries, no complex maintenance, no special tools beyond a pair of pliers or a boot heel. Any resistance fighter with basic instruction could deploy it effectively. That accessibility, combined with absolute reliability within its operational parameters, made it the most successful delayed action weapon of the Second World War. 12 million units manufactured, hundreds of thousands employed in combat operations, countless German supply trains destroyed, ammunition dumps obliterated, factories crippled, all triggered by a device small enough to conceal in a coat pocket and silent enough that no sentry ever heard it coming.